Revisiting Ray, the filmmaker, beyond nostalgia. This is a session in which contemporary filmmakers discuss the legacy of Ray in their work and in Indian cinema today. Porombrata Chattopadhyay, Seema Pahwa, Aditya Vikram Sengupta, Ronnie Sen will join us for the discussion, and the moderator is Arundhati Ghosh. Porombrata is also part of this panel, and uh, till yesterday, what he confirmed with me was that he was going to try to link up, but he is not in Calcutta. He's actually doing COVID relief work in the districts and moving around. And he said that if he can join in, he will. Meanwhile, let me read out a little bit of background on the people who we have on the panel today. Aditya Vikram Sengupta is a film director, a cinematographer, and a graphic designer. His first film, Asha Jawar Majhe, or Labor of Love, released in 2014, and it premiered at the Venice International Film Festival in the Venice Days section. It won the National Award for Best First Film of a Director and Best Audiography. His other films are Jonaki, an international co-production between India, France, Singapore, and Once Upon a Time in Calcutta, an international collaboration between India, France, and Norway, to be premiered later this year. He is currently developing his fourth film. Ronnie Sen is a film director, writer, and photographer based in Calcutta. His debut feature film, Catsticks, world premiered in the competition section at Slamdance 2019, where it won a Grand Jury Award. He has previously directed television documentaries for BBC. He started his career as a photographer and has made two artist books, Khmer Din 2013 and End of Time 2016. He received the Getty Images Instagram grant in 2016 for his work in the Jharia coal mines, which was shown in his debut solo exhibition in 2018. And his works are included in the permanent collection of the Alkazi Collection of Photography. Seema Pahwa is a popular actor, director, known for her role of Barki in the popular Doordarshan soap opera Hum Log. In 2014, she received acclaim for her experimental theatre performance of Bhisham Sahni's satire on the middle class, Saag Meat, where she cooked during the performance and the food was served to the audience. The latest movies in which she's acted are Suraj Pe Mangal Bhari, Bala and एक लड़की को देखा तो ऐसा लगा. She made her directorial debut with the film Ram Prasad Ki Tehrvi. In 2014, she won the Best Supporting Actress in Zee Cine Award for the film Aankho Dekhi, and she has actually been the recipient of several awards that with a very creditable career behind her. We are delighted that she's going to join us today and be part of this discussion. Porombrotto is, as many of you know, an actor and a filmmaker, and he made his debut as an actor with the famous Bengali fictional character Top Sheikh from Feluda under Sondi Price direction. He made his Hindi on-screen debut in Kahani. He has 10 films and TV series to his credit as a director, including Shonar Pahad. His latest directorial venture is Abhijan, a biopic on the late Soumitra Chatterjee. Hope that he is able to come in as part of today. And then we have our moderator, Arundhati Ghosh, Executive Director of India Foundation for the Arts, and somebody who's been steering the absolutely stellar art support program that the IFA has done for year after year. She was responsible for getting IFA the India NGO of the Year award, and she, in her own right, has a degree in classical dance and is a poet in Bangla. I'm keeping Arundhati's long biodata deliberately short, so here we go. I'd like to hand over to Arundhati to see if we can start the session.
Yeah, thanks, Anju. I'm delighted to have Ronnie and Aditya, both whose work has fascinated me for such a long time, and I'm indeed grateful, Anju, that you in some way found a non-artist to do this sort of moderation of this panel. Thank you so much. You know, there are two very provocative words in the title that you gave us, revisit and beyond nostalgia, right? When you are talking about Satyajit Ray, who many of us living, being born in, living and working in West Bengal, how do you revisit something that's so much part of your life all the time? How do you get beyond nostalgia about something that has been part of your growing up, your childhood, your school, your college, your everything? It's so all encompassing. So, I did a Google search. I just said Satyajit Ray and searched. In less than a second, it gave me 50 lakh results. Then I did Satyajit Ray films, less than a second, 45 lakh results. And then I said, okay, let me get very, very precise. Satyajit Ray film criticism and reviews, less than a second, 5 lakh results. And then I'm wondering, what are we going to talk about? Is there anything that has not been said about his films? So then I remembered that in 1991, Calvino had written this very beautiful book called Why Read Classics. It was about books, but I could actually draw a lot of what I read there to refer to sort of Ray's films. And he sort of gives various parameters by which you can say, judge or evaluate a book to be a classic. And what caught my attention the most, and there are many of them, as you know, Calvino writes so beautifully. And I'm sure many of our attendees today have read many of his books. So you just know the beauty and the sheer wit of his writing. So there was one definition that really stayed with me, which is, and I'll read this out, a classic is a work that persists as background noise, even when a present that is totally incompatible with it holds sway. And I thought that was pertinent to come back to your question of revisit and beyond nostalgia. So what I'm hoping that we're going to do today is actually see how his work, Satyajit Ray's work, if we consider it a classic, is something that we cannot remain indifferent to. We are defined by it either in context to it or in opposition to it, but it's very hard for us to not to have any opinions or relate to it at all. And the second thing that stays with me is that, like any classic, his work, whether we agree, disagree, like, dislike, have comments on, his work stays not just as residues in the work we do sometimes, but also the traces remain in our memory, in the way we associate with art, but also in probably our subconscious as well, in the manner in which we draw frameworks to understand art, look at art, evaluate aesthetics, etc. And how much do we go with it? How much do we rebel against it? So even if this discussion is just the three of us, Anjum, I would love for you to add in if you're available. Just come in whenever. It's a small panel if we don't have Seema and Parambrata with us. So with that, I would say both Ronnie and Aditya are very interesting filmmakers, new filmmakers to have. I've seen a couple of Aditya's films. I've been following Ronnie's photography work for a very long time, and I've worked with him. And I've seen his film as well. And I think they're very different kind of filmmakers, very different kind of things inspire them, obsess them. And that's why I think it's going to be a fairly interesting discussion for me, a lot of learning from me, from the two of you. You know what I wanted, and this is a post-lunch session, it's Sunday. There'll be mangsho bhat and ghoom. So I wanted to just quickly do a little game with you. And Anjum, if you want to just join in the game, okay? I'm going to give you a film, Ronnie, and then another film, Aditya, and Anjum, if you're game, I'm going to give you one. You have to immediately tell me in a word or maybe a short phrase, what comes to mind. The first maybe 3 or 4 words that come to your mind. They don't have to mean anything or be, in a linear form express anything, just words that come to your mind. Okay, so I start with Aditya.
Yeah.
I give you Pratibdondi.
Skeletons sitting outside the interview.
Super, super. Ronnie, it's you. Yeah? Kanchenjunga.
Ashok refusing the job offer. Yeah.
I read your interview.
Okay.
I read your little piece that you wrote. Awesome. So that's what comes to your mind first, right? Ashok refusing.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt once.
Ah.
There's one more very interesting trivia. My father was offered the role first.
Of which one?
Of Dhriti Man's role, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow. And what happened?
He didn't, his mother didn't let him take it up.
Oh gosh, Bengali men and listening to their mothers, right?
Yeah. So Baka festival.
Bakate. Okay. So Bakate chale jate hoye na jaye. That's why. Thanks, Aditya, for that little snippet. So Ronnie, from your Kanchenjunga, Anjum, can I do this to you?
Yeah, I'm game to do it. I hope I've seen the film though.
Okay.
Stick to an iconic one.
Otherwise, I will change the film. So, have you seen Parash Pathor?
No.
You've seen Pathir Panchali, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, the first three words that come to mind.
Brother and sister.
Okay.
And Tash Phool.
And Tash Phool, yeah, that image, we can't get it off, right? From our minds. Okay, there'll be another round before I go to the meat of this discussion today. And here what I'm going to do with the two filmmakers is give you two words that often get very associated when we talk about Satyajit Ray's films. They're very important aspects of his work. So Aditya, I give you music. Tell us a little bit about what your feel is. Again, in 3-4 words, probably. What comes to your mind?
With?
Music. With Satyajit Ray's films, with respect to Satyajit Ray's films. But music, specifically that aspect of his film.
I absolutely love his music. And I mean, that's the first thing. But if I have to elaborate, I won't be able to fit it in a few words. It's impossible.
So tell us. We have all the time today. So tell us.
No, I feel he was deeply inspired by both Western classical and Eastern Hindustani classical music. And he had a wide knowledge of world music as well. So he was quite accomplished in that sense. And, his music really intrigued me. I mean, post his earlier films, post Pathir Panchali and Jol Chokar, when he started writing his own music, he had a very distinct personality and style, which drew me very close to the cinema that he created. And it was so apt for the scenes and what he was creating that it was absolutely brilliant. And I think because he comes from a background which is very applied in nature, like applied arts, graphic design, I think the approach to music was also very applied to kind of make his film and make the experience of his films more effective, which I think he did brilliantly.
You know something, Aditya, I'll share an anecdote. This is something I didn't know. Recently, I was reading Supriya Chaudhury's this article that she's written in Bangla, Ghore ebong Baire Satyajiter Chhobi Sombondhe likhechen. And in that, she says she had this amazing experience of watching Battleship Potemkin with Satyajit Ray sitting behind her. Satyajit Ray used to be her father's friend. And I was like, I immediately had goosebumps. Imagine watching this film with Ray sitting behind you. And it seems that there was a time when the sound went off or something and he shouted sound. And then she gives this anecdote that Eisenstein had said that the theme music of the film was very important. Edmund Meisel had done the score, but he had said that every 20 years, there should be a new score for this. And it seems Satyajit Ray had done a score, though it hasn't been published anywhere, but there's the story that he had actually done the entire musical score for Battleship Potemkin. And I hope it's there somewhere.
Oh, and interestingly, I feel music is the most original aspect of Satyajit Ray that, kind of, for me, because even when it comes to cinema, you can draw in influences and things like that, but his music was extremely original and him. it was as if his personality kind of.
It's a characteristic almost, like it's almost a character in
it's like nothing else. It's like nothing else. Yeah.
Thanks, Aditya, for that. Ronnie, I'll come to you, and I'm a big fan of your photographs. From the time that I had seen your photographs in local trains, you've done these bodies, to, of course, the coal mines photographs, and later I just got to see so much. And the project where you went around doing the motorcycles across the different terrains in India, the sort of Royal Enfield thing. So I've been very intrigued with your eye, essentially, of how you see what you see with your eyes and with the eyes of your camera. And in your film as well, it really stands out how you see, from which side you see, from which angle you see. I think that's very uniquely Ronnie Sen. Somehow, I have even the little photos that you share on Facebook, like just things that you do maybe just every day because you're just looking out and seeing. The one thing that never stops amazing me is the way you see things. So with you, I will have this question. It's very obvious. Camera. Chothet Rai and camera. The way he saw. What do you have to say about that? And so much has been written. So I'm really interested to know how you see Chothet Rai seeing through the camera.
I'm not very sure if it's as much Satyajit Ray as and how much of it is Subrata Mitra.
Of course.
But definitely there was something happening when these guys were working together.
Yeah.
And undoubtedly one can safely say that that was 1950s, mid 50s, and there was some kind of birth of the modern Indian eye, if you can call it.
Mm-hmm.
And because as a photographer, I was looking at images when I was young and very consumed with images.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of photographs that I was interested in when I started looking at films, I remember when when I saw Pather Panchali, I was young and I couldn't understand what was happening.
Mm.
And I was drawn towards other films, Gopika in Baghabain, the Feluda's, many Feluda films, because Doordarshan was there in our school holidays. These films used to play, so we used to love it. There was no desire to make films or get into arts. Rather, I always found that artists are boring and so on. So there was no interest whatsoever. But when I started looking at photography, it took me a long time to understand images. And then when I saw Pather Panchali, it hit like a thunder, And then you realize that, oh my God, there's something phenomenal happening here. And then I fell in love.
Ronnie, explain that a little bit. When you say something phenomenal, what is it that you're alluding to? Just tell us a little more about how, as this artist who was discovering photography, relooks at the frames of Pather Panchali. What do you now see?
So the way into photography was through people like Joseph Kudelka, Katya Bressov, etc. And when I started watching films, and when I saw Subrata Mitra and Satyajit's earlier, the first films, they were very similar in nature, in the way images were flowing, the geometry, the shapes, the core philosophy of image making. Every craft, every language, every form has some kind of not formula, but there is a reason images look the way they do when masters make it, and you can really take down layers and understand how they are. So when I looked at Pather Panchali or many other films, mostly from the 50s and 60s, they were very similar to the images that Katya Bressov was making, or a lot of the European photographers were doing, so that's how I got a sort of, I could get into his work. And obviously I'm a Bengali, I've lived here, so I know what he's trying to talk about, what his stories are and the content and so on. That's another discussion. But as far as the aesthetic is concerned, it was very modern. It was very modern to an extent that nobody could even come close to what both of them have achieved, even today as we speak.
It still is.
It still is. So yeah, so that's what it is. I mean, you can't shoot like that. To be honest, Subrata Mitra was probably much more skilled and much more a fine artist than many of his contemporaries working in Europe, for example.
And
in Europe, in fine arts. So that was an incredible amount of good work, and you don't see the difference between a fine artist and the difference between a good artist and a master is thin. It's not a huge gap. The gap is determined by the consistency and the volume of work you can do and how much you can do. The kind of work that they have done, and all of them are, I mean, so powerful that it's unmatchable.
True. Thanks. You said this difference between, this reminded me of something. You said this difference between a good artist and a master is very thin, right? I've been learning some kinds of cooking recently, and this is something that I've felt. The difference between adequate salt and over salt is actually a tiny grain of salt. It's actually that much that makes that huge difference between what you say is perfect and what totally screws up a dish. So yeah, these distinctions are very acute actually. So now I'm going to come to the meat of our conversation today, and I go back to Aditya. Aditya, I could see your film Asha Jawar Majhane in my dreams after I saw it. The images just wouldn't leave me for days, and that only happens when something like that was my experience. And I've seen there's been a lot of writing about it. Different people have come in with comments, but it felt like you took something from the everyday and you gave it an epic kind of a dream quality to it that is with us to stay in spite of everything we face in our everyday lives. It's as if that hope stays. And I must say that I did think about Satyajit Ray when looking at your work. Like many times when I see Ronnie's work, it reminds me more of Ritwik Ghatak than it does Satyajit Ray. I'm being very honest. But with your work, it was Satyajit Ray that came to my mind. So I want to ask you, like, take all the time that you want now to tell us a little bit about how has your relationship as a filmmaker been with Ray, as your predecessor, as your ancestor in some ways. And I understand that our relationship with ancestors can be very complicated. We have our relationship with our ancestors who are feminists and today's feminists, and we have a very tension-filled love, hate, all kinds of complications in that relationship. I'm sure that happens among artists as well. So tell us, what is your relationship with Ray now?
So I have had a very fascinating relationship with Satyajit Ray's work, but especially his films. And as Ronnie pointed out, I only had access to a few of his films as a child, which was mainly Gopigain Bagabain and Sonar Kella. And Hirok Raja Deshe was pretty much the first memory of a film I have watching in a theater. But I didn't enjoy it much at that point of time.
Because the other two films, how did you see? Pather Pachali and Gopigain Bagabain?
Sonar Kella and
Gopigain Bagabain.
Gopigain Bagabain, we had VHS tapes.
Okay. So you saw it in the small screen. So
in the TV, on TV.
Yeah.
And so after I watched Sonar Killa for the first time when I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old, I started watching it every day. And so there was a time, like a long time, when I watched Sonar Killa every day. And so then when the summer holidays would start, I would watch it 2-3 times a day. And then between the summer vacations on Doordarshan, there used to be a show called Chutti Chutti Chutti, where they started showing Sonar Killa for, I think, 15 minutes with 3 breaks. So I would pause mine, watch that, and then replay mine again. And so I was completely obsessed with that film. And so much that it kind of, so at that point of time, obviously I didn't want to make films or any of that. So I was just watching it because I loved it so much. But I remain being obsessed with that film still, more than Gopika and Bhagabai. Gopika and Bhagabai was also fascinating, but Sonar Killa is a film that I've watched at least 600 to 700 to 800 times. And it's pretty much a Bible for me, you know, of moods, of everything that can just happen in, you know, when you're trying to represent life. And Satyajit Ray was essentially a humanist. And, you know, with the kind of influences that he's had, he observed and represented real people in a very real way. And his observations were so real that we connected with that so much that it felt really special, because no one really held a mirror of that sort. Everyone held mirrors which were distorted in some way or the other. It gave us a picture of reality, but it would be elongated or, you know, spherical or something, but not like a true picture. So later when I, you know, started getting deeper into his work and trying to understand what is it that connects me so much to his work, I think was his ability to understand humans, observe humans, and bring out this, you know, the smallest of things. For example, in Sonar Killa, the relationship that Mondar Bose and the Nokol Dr. Hajra had when they are playing Ludo and doing things like that, it's humanizing an evil character and antagonist, which we've later seen in films like, you know, Parasite or Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels or whatever. But that was pretty much the first time I got exposed to something like that. You know, that they are also having fun. They're also playing Ludo. They're also doing stuff. So I think this whole ability to humanize everything was really special. And so for the longest time, I didn't want to make films. And I mean, it never occurred to me. And I pretty much know when I really wanted to make films. And it wasn't Satyajit Ray films that kind of made me shift as such. But I was also very attached to his work as a graphic designer, which I found stunning, because I have studied graphic design in NID, and I've studied, you know, all his works, the kind of posters that he made and all of that. And so I felt that there was that, I mean, that sensibility of his extended into his cinema and his storytelling style. So although, you know, it's a collaborative art form, and you know, there are lots of heads in it. So I still feel that, you know, it's a strong driving force in the way he thought and the way he kind of maybe directed and directed a vision. So yeah, so that's pretty much kind of what, I mean, the relationship I've had. And it's mainly been like a deep connection, like childhood connection with Sonar Killa and Gopika and Bhagabai.
Yeah. Aditya, little follow-up question, a short one actually, and I just saw that this has also come up as part of the questions, but I feel like asking you now because you're talking about this. Has your kind of perspective on the kind of aesthetics that you want to use in your films have been in any way influenced by Shotit Roy, or is it a mix of, normally it's a combination of things that we experience that comes out as our own sort of choice of aesthetics? How has it been for you?
So I really feel that, whenever we watch something now and we say that it's very rayish, or when we say that, the character is a very Ray character, it's actually not a Ray character. I feel that it's a very true representation of how a character should be represented.
And because Ray, like you're saying,
just because Ray, because
Ray
could do it, we kind of say that it's a Ray character.
Ray thing.
Yeah, and anyway, we have a tendency to, just hold on to something and feel proud and just sit back, relaxed, and not want to do anything else. So, coming from that point of view, I think it's easier to not dissect these things and just say that, fine, we have Ray, we don't need to do anything else, or we don't need to. So it's.
And I think that's why Anjum very cleverly attached that beyond nostalgia into our session, right? We can't do that in this session at least. And you're right. What you're essentially saying is that things we learn from other people's work, and then we don't need to go back to that. It's the learning. So I see that your learning was that Ray showed characters in a manner that was there, that nobody else did before. And all other mirrors were distorted. This one wasn't. And that's probably what you picked up for your work. And that necessarily isn't Ray per se, like you're saying that.
And it kind of trained me to kind of observe more, I feel. In people and be more empathetic towards people. Because if you're not empathetic towards humanity and people, I don't think people should even care trying to make cinema or music or any of that, because that's the main element. It's not like, I need to make a film, I want to be a filmmaker, let me think of a story. It can't happen, doesn't happen like that. It does happen, but might not connect that way.
And I must say, and before I move to Ronnie to ask him a sort of similar question, I must say that the two pieces of image from your film that I found most touched me was the Kapur Mela scene where the wet clothes are being put on the alshe and the line, and the keeping of the food. Because like you're saying, one sees a person there who's directing this bit as somebody who's watched this action time and time and time again, watched every move, because obviously that wasn't real, right? Somebody was doing it as part of a performance. But for it to have those little nuances, so thank you very much for that film and for the amazing images you made there. So thanks, Aditya. Moving to Ronnie, a similar question about and also I want to relate it to you being a photographer and then moving into being a photographer and a filmmaker here. What has your relationship with Shotit Rai and his filmmaking, the whole oeuvre of the shadow rather of his filmmaking that we live under as being part of the artistic community in this country? What has your relationship been like with that?
I mean, I have never felt any burden of this. So for me, every great master has something to teach, but then there are some people who become very very special, that you keep going back to again and again and again. So Shotojit is one of them, not because of anything else, but one, as Aditya said, that he was a humanist, and also really like what he said, that his music was very original. I also agree that I think the most original thing about him is his music. I mean, it's so distinct. So, I mean, what I think is, and what I think about Ray is also changing all the time. It's evolving, and every 5 years it changes and you realize something new. And that's the beauty about him and his work. But the most fascinating thing about him is he's very sharp. So if you are into the arts, you can learn a craft, or if you are in pure aesthetics, you can practice and practice and practice, and you can become good. But the intelligence and the sharpness of the mind is something that, you can't just learn. So that is fascinating. I mean, 10 minutes in a Ray film and you know that it's a incredibly interesting person telling you a story. And end of the day, every artist does that. The form is just a vehicle for us to know who the person is. And end of the day, that becomes secondary. Even if you, and this is the same in music. There are so many good instrument players you like, but then you keep going back to Dylan, and there is a reason for that, because there is something that he's saying, and that's true for Satyajit also. But my relationship with him, number one, it has been sort of like a teacher-student relationship, you can say. You can go back, and what Aditya was also saying, that
but is it also a teacher you fight with, argue with, or is it a teacher that you mostly listen to?
I mean, you can't have, every relationship is a love and hate relationship. So once in a while, once in a while you think that, oh my God, I mean, things could have been better or whatever. And I mean, you see things that you don't want to do, but then, I mean, this is with everyone, the people you love the most, you are always very critical of them. But I mean, I have things which I don't like, but they are not important as much. What is important is the man has a lot to teach. The discipline. He worked his whole life. Every year, every 2 years, he was making a film. Back in the 50s, he managed to get in touch with, people at Museum of Modern Art. And I mean, I met one of the curators of MoMA when we were showing our film, and very old curator, Larry Kardish. And he said that they apparently had funded some, I mean, for post-production of Pathar Pachali, they had given him some money, and the world premiere was there at MoMA. So, and I said it in, I think there was some discussion somewhere, and I said the same thing, that museums back then had a very strong role to play, which is kind of dying right now. And it was incredible that he could reach out to people without emails and social media, whatever, and get support, and people responded, and that was important, because without that, I really doubt how much Calcutta would have given him any patta.
Without the world recognizing him.
It doesn't happen in India. I mean, if nobody, look, we are beggars, no? So until and unless the West gives you anything, here nobody gives you any bhav. You are like, I mean, even after the West gives you bhav, nobody gives you bhav here. So it's, I mean, Bengalis are one step like ahead. Anyhow, so, but for me, it had been very, I mean, there were some artists who were incredibly sort of inspirational in my life, and Subrata Mitra happens to be one. Satyajit Ray definitely, in the way, I mean, more than a cinematographer or director, has a bigger role to play, obviously. So, especially films like Kanchenjunga, etc. When I was in college and when I saw these films, a character like Ashok coming on screen was very very moving. In the same way, photography happened.
Very rare as well.
Yeah, very rare. And I mean, it's not it's something that you don't see in Indian films, And also, for me, being in the arts has always been about self-reflection and nothing else. It was never about anything else other than saying what I wanted to say. So beyond that, I had no other interest. When I had started photography was mostly confined to photojournalism and commercial photography and news photography, and it was never inside galleries, for example. There were no galleries in Calcutta, commercial galleries in Calcutta who were showing photographs. There were a few in Delhi. There were very few in Bombay. So, and I always sort of used to feel that, maybe this is not what I want to do. And then I looked at some photographers and I saw that they are shooting what's happening in their life and people are happy to see it. So what else do you want? You can do the same. And when you look at a character like Ashok coming on the screen and you think that, oh my God, I mean, these are people that you also know in your life, very middle class, very vulnerable, very stupid, but they tell you a lot, I mean, it's a weird kind of relationship that you suddenly build with someone, and that stayed, and slowly, steadily, it kind of grew, and you see one film after the other. You see Porosh Pathor, and then you see Nayok, and you're like, who is this man? And
constantly
you feel that
his films also. He's constantly reinventing himself within his films as well.
Yeah, one thing I find, just because today's sort of topic is beyond nostalgia, I somehow feel that Ray, and the way we talk about Ray in the sort of popular media, or the way people talk about him, it's fine, but nobody really talks about, how he was inspired by American films, films from the early Hollywood. And I mean, I'm saying this because the same happened with me when I was working with images. I mean, when I was very young, just starting out, I was really into European work, heavily based on sort of aesthetics and all of that. But slowly, steadily, I started liking American photographers just because they were so modern. And then it took some kind of unlearning, and when I started thinking about films, the challenge was to unlearn the sort of modernist trends that you have seen in films of Ray, Mrinal Sen, etc., and what you can do. So, I mean, the influence of American films, obviously in Calcutta, you can't really say that you like American films, because we were under a huge cultural sort of burden that I mean, Polish filmmakers were also thought as CIA agents and so on. So till even today, it's very difficult. I mean, in our circles, if you go and say that Hollywood is good, people are like, who is this guy? So
Ronnie,
that's a problem.
There's a couple of questions, but before I come to that, and Aditya, I'll go back to you now, taking some of the questions, because I'm also looking at the time. We've had a very lovely afternoon, so we're not realizing time like run past us. But Ronnie, this is to you. The question is to you, actually, is about the black and white films of Ray and the later colored ones. So the question is that whether the same aspect of mastery of visuals followed through in, according to you, followed through in the later colored films. And the question comes, and this is something I'm presuming, comes from a place where it may not have been, kind of thing. But the person wants to know what you thought of it, of this transition.
Honestly, they were horrific, actually. But yeah, but Satyajit was never a man of images, so we shouldn't complain. And that's the reason I was talking about American films and the influences he had. And he had spoken at length about these things in his interviews, that he was not interested in aesthetics. He was not interested in visual language. This is our imagination and the way we want to sort of মানে একটা অদ্ভুত ভাবে চাপিয়ে দেওয়া তো কোনো মানে হয় না. You know what I mean? And
impose a certain framework of seeing it.
Yeah, that's not the case. He was not Ram Kinkar or M.F. Hussain, So, and he had always said, when people had asked him that, how do you see yourself? And he said that I'm a storyteller. And fascinating. And he's a fascinating storyteller. He's a fantastic writer. He's a very, very sharp director who knew that under what constraints he is working. And his color works were brilliant. I mean, Kanchenjunga was great. But the person who asked the question maybe feels the same thing.
No, adding to that, he was also confined to studio spaces and indoor spaces because of his health. Had he been going outdoors like Kanchenjunga, I'm sure it would have been
a different field.
Yeah, completely. So
there is another question, and this is something I wanted to ask you as well, that not enough is discussed about his documentary filmmaking. Again, mostly we talk about his fiction films, but his documentary is also there. He shows in another way how he's a great storyteller, because even in documentary films, at the end of the day, you're telling a story about something that is important to you, that you think should be out there. Do you have Aditya, I'll go to you for this. Do you have any specific points of view about his documentary filmmaking?
I'm not. Unfortunately, I haven't watched.
Ronnie, you have anything to say?
I have seen they are very good, but I mean, I don't think Satyajit is known for his documentary work. And this is not really his forte, So, I mean, his strongest works were mostly, my personal opinion, his strongest works were mostly the works he did in the 50s and 60s. And they are something that is so powerful. And if you look at the way his works have been talked about across the world, like,
I agree.
What critiques have said and what museums are showing today, museums are not showing his later works or his documentaries. So his earlier works are the works which are genuinely, as I said, the birth of the Indian modern eye.
The Calcutta trilogy, to be
fantastic. Aditya, Ronnie, we have Seema joining us now. Seema, hi. I'm delighted that you have been able to join us. Seema ji, aapse puchna hai mujhe. When we first talked about this, when I was inviting you to this panel, and I said, there are two things I had in mind. Where's the woman speaking on this panel? And where is the Bengal se bahar speaking in this panel? So, Udit Rai, a Bengali man making films in Bengal. I wanted a woman from outside Bengal, and I wanted to listen to your point of view, more so because you've been a fabulous actor all your life. You have had the fortune to be directed by directors like Naseeruddin Shah in theatre. I've seen it. And from the Barki to the Motley production directed by Naseeruddin Shah plays that I've seen of yours. Delightful, to say the least. And then when I saw Ram Prasad Ki Pairvi, I was floored as that was your first film. So, actor, filmmaker, Bengal ki, Bahar ki, and woman, you have many representations to do now. आप कहिए आपको क्या लगता है देखे बारे में आपका क्या ख्याल है?
सबसे पहले तो मैं ये कहना चाहूंगी, जो भी मैंने लास्ट सुना, मैं पहले माफी मांगना चाहूंगी कि मैंने लेट ज्वाइन किया है, लेकिन अभी जो बात चल रही थी आप लोगों के बीच में और जिसमें 50 और 60s की फिल्मों की बात हो रही थी, तो मैं भी उसमें ही ज्वाइन करना चाहूंगी कि एक्चुअली में हाँ, चाहे वो बंगाल हो, चाहे वो हिंदी फिल्म्स हो, पर जो 50-60 में जो हमें सिनेमा मिला है वो उसके बाद गायब हो गया, इंडिया से पूरी तरह से गायब हो गया। बहुत ही रेयर कभी कोई एक फिल्म मिलती थी जिसमें हमें एक्चुअल सिनेमा देखने को मिलता था, जो कि मुझे लगता है कि जब से मैं पैदा हुई हूँ और जब से मैंने सिनेमा देखना शुरू किया है, अगर मैं पुरानी फिल्मों को छोड़ दूं तो नए सिनेमा में हम तरस गए थे देखने के लिए। मतलब कुछ फिल्में थी जो जिन्हें हम आर्ट फिल्म्स कह देते थे, पैरेलल सिनेमा कह देते थे, उसमें जो फिल्में बन रही थी वो मुझे लगता है कि फिर भी बहुत क्या कहना चाहिए कि बहुत एम्फसाइज करके फिल्में बन रही थी, जो कि मुझे हमेशा एक शिकायत रहती थी कि हम हमेशा ऐसे सब्जेक्ट पे क्यों बात कर रहे हैं, हमेशा हम ऐसी चीजें क्यों दिखाना चाह रहे हैं आर्ट के नाम पे, जो कि हमारी 50-60 की फिल्म्स में हमारी अपनी जिंदगी की कहानियों को लेके इतनी खूबसूरत फिल्में बनाई गई हैं जो आम आदमी भी रिलेट कर सके। आर्ट फॉर्म से हम आम आदमी को अलग नहीं कर सकते हैं कि हम ये कहें कि नहीं ठीक है ये इंटेलेक्चुअल लोगों का सिनेमा है और ये आम आदमी का सिनेमा है, जो वो समझे या ना समझे ये हमारी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। पर मुझे लगता नहीं ये हमारी प्रॉब्लम है एज ए फिल्म मेकर, ये हमारी बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है कि हम जो कहना चाहते हैं वो हम हमेशा 20% लोगों के लिए फिल्म क्यों बनाएं, हम क्यों ना 100% लोगों के लिए फिल्म बनाएं। और उसमें हम मिस्टेक कर देते हैं कि 100 फिल्म में जाने के चक्कर में, 100% जाने के चक्कर में हम कमर्शियल सिनेमा जिसमें हम डांस गाना नाच सब कुछ डाल देते हैं ताकि लोग अट्रैक्ट हो जाए। पर मुझे लगता है कि नहीं, अगर आप एक सिंपल कहानी, एक सिंपल लाइफ, और वो भी एक मिडिल क्लास या लोअर मिडिल क्लास की कहानी को भी अगर आप इस तरह से प्रेजेंट करें कि लोग हंसे मजे ले, जो एंजॉय करना चाहते हैं, जो एंटरटेनमेंट जो हमारा पर्पस है फिल्म का वो भी कंप्लीट हो, साथ में हम उन्हें गुड सिनेमा दिखा सके। गुड सिनेमा इन द सेंस कि एक सिनेमा मतलब जिसे हम लेंस के थ्रू दिखा रहे हैं। मुझे लगता है कि हमारे पास इतनी बड़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी होती है एज ए फिल्म मेकर कि हमारे पास हम कैमरा के थ्रू हम दिखा रहे हैं चीजों को, तो हम तो कहाँ कहाँ पहुंच सकते हैं, कौन सी दुनिया क्रिएट कर सकते हैं, बट हम अपने आप को लिमिटेशंस में बांध रहे हैं। हम एक तरह की कहानियों को लेके बस उसको बनाए चले जा रहे एंटरटेनमेंट के नाम पे। बट मुझे लगता है कि अगर हम अच्छा कंटेंट हो हमारे पास, हमारी कहानी अच्छी है और उसके साथ प्लस हम उसे एक बेहतरीन सिनेमा के रूप में लोगों तक पहुंचा सकें, तो धीरे धीरे जो 50-60 में करिश्मे हुए हैं वो करिश्मा आज भी हम पैदा कर सकते हैं। बट हम शायद डरते हैं या हमारा जो भी प्रॉब्लम है। तो मुझे लगता है कि मैंने जो इस दौरान जैसा आपने कहा कि बड़की से लेकर एक फिल्म मेकर तक का जो सफर है उसमें मैंने ये बहुत मिस किया है सिनेमा को लेके, जितना मैं समझी हूँ। और मुझे लगा कि जब मुझे बनाने का मौका मिला है तो मैं ये कोशिश करूं कि वो एंटरटेनमेंट भी हो और उसके अलावा वो एक सिनेमा भी हो, एक पोइट्री की तरह, जो कि अगर हम बात करें सत्यजीत रे साहब की, तो उनकी फिल्म कहानियां जो थी वो एक ऐसा लगता था पोइट्री है, ना कि सिर्फ फिल्म है। वो पानी की तरह कैसे बह के हमें अपने साथ ले जा रही है और हम उसके साथ बहते बहते एंड तक जो भी डायरेक्टर कहना चाह रहा है या स्टोरी राइटर कहना चाह रहा है उस तक पहुंच पा रहे हैं। हमें कोई भी चीज डिस्टर्ब नहीं कर रही है, ना सॉन्ग डिस्टर्ब कर रहे हैं, ना नाच गाना डिस्टर्ब कर रहा है, हमारी कहानी चल रही है। तो मैं हमेशा ऐसे सिनेमा बिलीव करती रही हूँ, चाहे वो हिंदी सिनेमा हो, चाहे बंगाल का हो, चाहे वो हमारे साउथ का सिनेमा हो, लेकिन जहां भी कंटेंट वाइज हम स्ट्रांगली और गुड सिनेमा दिखा सकें, मेरा बिलीव उसी पे रहा है। और मुझे लगता है कि दिस इज द बेस्ट वे।
और सीमा, स्पेसिफिकली रे के बारे में आपने जो कहा, जैसे पानी पानी बहता पानी जैसा लगता है उनका फिल्म में शामिल होना, ऑडियंस की तरह उनके फिल्म में शामिल होना, तो आप थोड़ा और कहेंगे कि रे का कोई इन्फ्लुएंस रहा है आपका खुद का फिल्म मेकिंग में? जब आप खुद सोचे कि मैं अभी एक फिल्म डायरेक्ट करना चाहूंगी, तो मैं आई एम श्योर आपने बहुत सारे जो आपने सीखा है खुद डायरेक्टरों से काम करके या देखा है फिल्म, उनका असर तो हुआ होगा आपके सोच में, आपके कहानी कहने की जो प्रक्रिया है उसमें। तो ऐसा कुछ आप शेयर करें जो आप रे से रिलेट करते हो, जो उनके स्पेसिफिकली उनका दान हो आपके कहानी कहने की प्रक्रिया में।
हाँ, मुझे लगता है कि जो भी जितना मैं बहुत ज्यादा नहीं जानती हूँ या मैं ज्यादा बोल नहीं सकती हूँ, क्योंकि बहुत छोटा मुंह बड़ी बात होगी रे साहब के लिए कुछ भी बोलना, बट जितनी भी फिल्में मैं देख पाई, क्योंकि एक बंगाल की फिल्म्स के साथ बहुत लेट इंट्रोडक्शन हुआ, बहुत लेट मैं जुड़ पाई हूँ, क्योंकि हम बचपन से हिंदी फिल्में देखते रहे हैं। लेकिन फिर जब से वो देखनी शुरू की और जब से उन कहानियों के साथ जुड़ी हूँ मैं, जैसे स्पेशली मैं एक फिल्म मेंशन करना चाहूंगी, महानगर। महानगर कहानी मुझे इतना अपील की थी सत्यजीत रे साहब की, कि मुझे लगा था कि ओ इसका बहुत जिक्र नहीं है, पर कुछ और फिल्मों का ज्यादा जिक्र है, पाता पंचाली है या अपू संसार है, इनकी फिल्मों का ज्यादा जिक्र है। पर महानगर मेरे हिसाब से मुझे मुझे सबसे ज्यादा हिट की थी वो फिल्म, क्योंकि इतना कमाल टॉपिक वो छेड़ा गया था जो आज भी रेलिवेंट है। आज भी हमारे सोसाइटी में एक औरत का घर से निकल के वर्किंग होना और उसके घर पे जो भी उसका प्रभाव है, तो राइटिंग ही नहीं, मुझे लगता है रे साहब ने उसमें जो फ्रेम भी यूज किए हैं, जिस तरह से उन्होंने उस घर का वो घर आपस में कितना जुड़ा हुआ है, उसके रिश्ते कितने जुड़े हुए हैं, चाहे वो सास है, ससुर है, बेटा है, बहू है, नंद है, बच्चा है, वो एक पूरी फैमिली को लेके, और उस पूरी फैमिली पे एक किसी चीज का प्रभाव पड़ना, एक औरत के वर्किंग होने से उस पूरे घर की चहल पहल बदल जाना, एक आप कितना बड़ा सिनेमा आप दिखा रहे हैं, हमें हमें एक हीरो हीरोइन की कहानी नहीं दिखा रहे, आप उसमें हमें हर कैरेक्टर की कहानी दिखा रहे हैं। और जो मुझे उनकी फिल्मों में हमेशा लगा कि उन्होंने एक तो वो कहाँ से बिलोंग करता है, पहले वो क्रिएट करते थे, उस दुनिया को क्रिएट करते थे। तो जब आप उस दुनिया से इंट्रोडक्शन आपकी हो जाती है, तो आप उस कैरेक्टर से ज्यादा रिलेट कर पाते हैं अपने आप को, क्योंकि आपको मालूम है अच्छा ये आदमी इस जगह से बिलोंग करता है। तो वो जो खूबसूरती थी उनकी फिल्मों में, कि पहले वो पूरा एटमॉस्फेयर क्रिएट करना, उस सोसाइटी को क्रिएट करना, उसके बाद हम उस कहानी को सुनने जा रहे हैं जो उस सोसाइटी का एक आदमी है, जिसकी कहानी है। ये नहीं कि मेरी कहानी ही हीरो से शुरू हो रही है और मेरी कहानी ही हीरोइन से शुरू हो रही है, नहीं, मेरी कहानी पहले एनवायरनमेंट से शुरू हो रही है, मेरी कहानी पहले एटमॉस्फेयर क्रिएट कर रही है, मेरी कहानी पहले मुझे दिखा रही है कि मैं कौन सी जगह पर हूँ, कौन सा मौसम चल रहा है, किस सीजन की बात कर रहे हैं हम। ये इतनी डिटेलिंग जो है वो आपको कहीं ना कहीं,
जिसको कहते हैं ना कि कॉन्टेक्स्ट बनाना पड़ता है,
बिल्कुल, और वो बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि आप कहानी कहाँ से बिलोंग करती है वो तो बताना जरूरी है, जो हमारे मेकर्स भूल जाते हैं, हमारे मेकर्स नहीं करते हैं, हम बहुत कट टू कट बात करना चाहते हैं। तो वो मैंने काफी कुछ सीखा है, और मुझे लगता है कि हम लोग बहुत लकी हैं कि हमारे पास बहुत सारे ऐसे डायरेक्टर्स और राइटर्स रहे हैं जिन्होंने हमें बेहतरीन सिनेमा दिया है। और डेफिनेटली उनका इन्फ्लुएंस मेरे पर रहा है, क्योंकि जब से हम इस फील्ड से जुड़ी हूँ मैं, तब से मैं बहुत सारे डायरेक्टर्स के साथ काम कर रही हूँ, बहुत सारा सिनेमा देख रही हूँ। तो आप जो भी बनते हैं उन सब चीजों का अंश ही तो होते हैं, वो सारी कंट्रीब्यूशन आपके लाइफ में हमेशा काम करती है। तो मैं डेफिनेटली मानूंगी कि इन लोगों का ही प्रभाव रहा होगा शायद, जो इस तरह की कहानी मुझसे बन गई, या मैंने लिख दी, या मैंने बना दी, या कैरेक्टर्स को मैं समझा पाई उस एटमॉस्फेयर के बारे में। तो मुझे लगता है कि डेफिनेटली बहुत बढ़िया सिनेमा देख के हम आए, तो हमें बनाना भी चाहिए।
थैंक्स सीमा, thanks for that. Before we end, I want a quick like a sort of last comments, because I think many people who are watching आज, so I'll come to Aditya, then Ronnie and then Seema, कि आज जो बहुत सारे लोग जो हमें सुन रहे हैं आज, उनमें से there are many students, of course there are makers of films, there are people who enjoy watching, discussing films, there are scholars, so I was thinking specifically about students, students who are either making films or being associated with filmmaking in different ways. Unke liye, is there some sort of parting comments that the panelists may have in very short? So okay. Aditya, would you begin? Is there something that either experiences from your own life as an artist, or something that you want to share as a sort of parting shot?
I'll just share where I come from as a filmmaker or as an artist. And that's, from a need to kind of express myself, because I'm reacting to the world constantly around me. So in the form of paintings or music or films, and these are just mediums which is appropriate for a certain expression. But at the end of the day, what I've, in hindsight, when I look back and I kind of try and understand why I wanted to paint or why I wanted to write music or why I choose to make films is, this is just my journey and way of understanding and absorbing life. And everything that has happened to me till date. It's almost a way of recording it.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people write diaries, a lot of people do various things in which they kind of come to peace with certain happenings or certain incidents, or they kind of, make peace with certain tragedies or incidents in their life. And this for me is a way of just understanding and absorbing and accepting life in a way. Not in a way, it is. And I feel love is what is required, and empathy is what is required. Understanding humans is what is required, and once you start getting into that, you'll see everything very differently. The moment you start seeing it through people and through their souls and through their stories and through, how they perceive the world, and try to be empathetic and understanding the world from various point of views. So that's pretty much where I come from.
Thanks for sharing that, Aditya. Ronnie, a few words from you.
For students?
Anybody, either for students, those who are making, or just end with some thoughts that you're having right now.
Some gyan,
or reflection. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people think that, I also used to think that to have an interesting way of looking is important. But then, as Picasso had said, that I don't paint what I see, I paint what I know. And when we are talking about Satyajit Ray, it's very important to understand that it was not really a way of looking or a certain aesthetic or language that he was interested in. Obviously he was, but what he knew is what he said. And that is important. End of the day, to go live a life, to have some kind of relationship either with the world or with your dog or with your, anyone that anyone loves. One can tell any story with any language. There are hundreds of visual languages available for people to go learn. So there's no problem with language. There's only problem with politics. So if anyone has any kind of relationship with anything, they should totally feel free to explore and not fear. And that's about it.
Thanks, Ronnie. Seema,
thank you.
मैं कहना चाहूंगी कि मेरी जर्नी शुरू हुई एज एन एक्ट्रेस. तो एक एक्ट्रेस होने के नाते जो मैं अपनी परफॉर्मेंसेस में जो इमेजेस ढूंढ रही थी, जो मैं अपने आसपास के कैरेक्टर्स को ढूंढती हूँ या उनको ऑब्जर्व करा है, उनको लेने की कोशिश करती हूँ कि उससे कैरेक्टराइजेशन मेरा बने. तो मुझे लगा जब एज ए फिल्म मेकर जब मैंने सोचना शुरू किया तो मेरे सामने वो कैरेक्टर्स ऐसे खड़े हो रहे थे. जब मैं परफॉर्मेंस करती हूँ जो खड़े हो जाते हैं आके मेरे सामने आंखों के, तो मुझे लगा कि वो एक जर्नी जो मेरी रही है एक एक्ट्रेस से शिफ्ट टू डायरेक्टर, वो बहुत हेल्पफुल थी इस फिल्म के लिए, पर्टिकुलर इस फिल्म के लिए, क्योंकि मुझे लगता है कि सिनेमा समझने के लिए पहले मैंने वो खुद करके देखा और खुद को एक्सपीरियंस लिया है कि किस तरह से चीजें बनती हैं. तो वो प्रोसेस जो है वो मुझे लगता है एज ए फिल्म मेकर मुझे बहुत मदद किया है और उस जर्नी को करने के बाद मैं ज्यादा अंडरस्टैंड कर पाई हूँ सिनेमा के एक मीनिंग को, कह सकती हूँ कि कैसे ऑडियंस से रिलेट करना चाहिए. तो मुझे लगता है कि जितना, जैसा कि उन्होंने भी कहा कि आप क्या समझ रहे हैं, आप क्या जानते हैं, वो दिखना ज्यादा जरूरी है, ना कि जो दिख रहा है वो जरूरी है. तो मेरी जितनी समझ है या मैं जिस तरह से पली बड़ी हूँ या जो मेरे नॉलेज है उसके हिसाब से मैंने जो अपनी नजर से सिनेमा देखा है या मैंने जो रिसीव किया है वो सिनेमा है मेरा. और सिर्फ मेरा है, वो किसी और का नहीं हो सकता। सुनो, तो मेरा इंडिविजुअल एक्सपीरियंस है, क्योंकि मेरी जितनी एजुकेशन है, जितना मेरा सराउंडिंग लोग हैं, उसके हिसाब से मैंने वो उसको रिसीव किया है। तो जो मैंने रिसीव किया है उसको मैं, अब मेरी देने की बारी है, तो मैं उसको जिस भी तरह से पेश कर सकूंगी या जिस भी तरह से दिखा सकूंगी, वो ही मुझे लगता है मेरे लिए सिनेमा है।
Thanks, Seema. Thank you, Ronnie, Aditya, and Seema. I began this session.
Thank you.
Thanks, with Calvino's book 1991 Why Read Classic. And one thing he said about it is that whether you agree with a classic or not, it allows for a cloud of discourse on the subject to happen around it whenever you bring it up. And that's what happens with Ray. We bring him up, we bring up his filmmaking, and we land up talking about our times, our work, our making, our thoughts. Thank you so much, Anjum, and to the Navannu Festival for allowing us this wonderful conversation. And thank you to the audience. I'm so sorry we couldn't take, there are still 20 questions, Anjum, but we had a very short time. So I hope there are ways in which the filmmakers can respond to them later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arundhati. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you.
And Seema ji, thank you for joining. And yes, we will try and deal with the questions. I'll figure out a way of doing that. Yeah. And thank you for a very, very interesting discussion.